Okay, this is a little bit different, and I'm going to do a couple of things here in the middle of as I do this. One, I haven't rehearsed, I haven't practiced. I will add that I'm a high school teacher, so I'm used to getting up in front of people. So I will go through that. The other thing is I've just referred to myself in the third person. That's possibly a little bit about the way I see myself, I guess, but it's also something that someone else can use later.
Yes.
So there we are. So if I call this out of the big house, because that's where Mitchell's been, in the big house. That's me and him in Bundaberg, down by the beach. And it's a different kind of advocacy. It certainly is different for Capricorn advocacy. So in this presentation, I'll give you a little bit of introduction to a lesser known aspect of society, some definitions, some stats, the problem, our story, the future, and lessons, and some Q&A. So prisons in Australia, they're since 1788. I'm living proof of that, descendant from 2 First Fleet convicts. So it's a key part of the Australian story, very much part of our myth, our whole history, but it hasn't gone away. And I did some research, 2021 census, Australia's total population was 25.5 million roughly. Total prison population was 42,000, which is only, I think the maths is right, 0.017%. Not much. The median age of prisoners, in other words, the middle of the spread of prisoners, is 35.6. Lifers, the median age is 39. Mitchell was a lifer. Prisoners in jail and remand make up the biggest proportion, 15% of the population. This is the bit that gets me, I sort of knew this, but 29% of prisoners have disabilities. Only 18% of the general population. So that's almost double. Life sentences, what does that mean? I have to do some research about this. Life sentences vary from state to state. It's no longer about for the term of his natural life. That was the old one. Federal offences, I learned this one too, involve terrorism, illegal drug importation, and social security fraud, which seemed a bit anomalous to me, but anyway. All other crimes are covered under state jurisdiction. Life sentences, most of them are the murder, but there's also sexual assault, manufacturing, trafficking, commercial quantities of drugs, blah, blah, blah. Justice system and offences against justice and government security. For life is life for many, even after release. Mitchell, for example, is on parole conditions, probation conditions for the rest of his days. So there's 12,000 people on parole across Australia at any time. Of these, almost half return to prison, and half end up back with corrective services, which could mean probation parole. So after release can be complete freedom or probation and parole. I thought that, wasn't sure what happened when prisoners are released. Depending on the situation, quite often they can either be put on a bus or someone picks them up, they drop into town, I think they take them to Centrelink to get a welfare card and something, and that's it. If you've been inside for 17 years, as Mitchell had, that's a bit of a jump. And in his case, I thought he was going to be released in Rockhampton. I would be there to pick him up. No, he was released from Brisbane, short notice, and he had to find his way to Bundaberg. Might have been given a ticket. Trains and everything's a bit different after 20 years later. Support extends to organising Centrelink, sometimes accommodation, some agencies. For many lifers, there's a massive adjustment. Spoke to one lady who works with them, and she said she's had grown men, big, strong men, sitting there bawling their eyes out because they're just overwhelmed. Agencies are limited, and there can be difficulties working out who's doing what. There's a video later in that I explain that me going around to agencies trot on toes, very much little turf wars. The NDIS can be involved, but it's not always straightforward, as we know. Citizen Advocacy has been involved in this area in the past, apparently WA in 2000. So Mitchell's story, 2018, he was 53. He was a long-term inmate at the Capricorn Correctional Centre, or as everyone calls it up there, Edman Creek. Just before he was being jailed in 2001, he incurred an acquired brain injury. There is a story around that, and it's not over. There's circumstances. The ABI impacted his life very negatively, particularly in time management, planning, short-term memory loss and learning difficulties. Before prison he was employed, had a wife and family. I think he might have been drinking a bit much. We don't talk a lot about that. When released he was unable to work and had almost no supports. He didn't get his family to come and see him, his stepdaughter or her kids. He didn't want them to see, the kids particularly, to see him in that situation. So he kept them all at arm's length. But he'd ring them and talk to them, but that's what he did. He's told me quite a few hair-raising stories about time inside. For example, one dentist, 600 guys, 1 day a week, does not make it work. Your teeth get really bad, you pull them out. You can't get to see someone because you've got a skin cancer. Well, you accommodate yourself. So prisoners are segregated from everyday community life. He had many years of prison routine, several facilities. When he left, they hadn't yet agreed on an NDIS protocol for him, so he wasn't a participant at that point. Mentioned the next 2 lines, and so that's all explained. CCA in Rocky, Ewan, that matches competent members of the community, well, most of the time, as advocates of vulnerable people with disabilities. They are unpaid and freely given relationships. Matches are informal supports, you know, all the other story around all that. And in this case, I think Ewan had approached the prison management, and his idea was that he was going to get a young Indigenous gentleman. The prison replied and said, sadly those guys are on a revolving door. It's really not going to work, but we've got someone in mind. And that was Mitchell, who was determined to keep his head down, do his time, get out. He had a few rough times earlier on. I guess that was adjusting to it all. Certainly he'd been in a few altercations, a couple of other things. Some of them pretty serious. You know, fair bit of time in the infirmary after that. So they selected Mitchell. So I got to meet one of the managers of the correction centre. She came in and spoke to Ewan and me. I got to meet 1 or 2 others, and I went to some gathering I think probation had put on, so I got to meet a bit more of the community around there, around that side of town, that part of the world. Me, this is about me. A friend of mine points out, she said, you've got a skill set that encompasses knowledge, skills, experience and empathy. I am a teacher. As a teacher, I've taught in high school. History, English, that's my thing. But I've been a teacher-librarian. I've been a regional computer mentor for teachers when computers first started coming in. I had a go at being a principal for a year, gave that up very quickly. Worked in distance education, have tutored at TAFE for Papua New Guineans, worked in special assistant school for a year, and now in the Catholic system as a support teacher for inclusive education. I've always empathised with battlers, outsiders and people dealing with hardships. It's just the places I've lived. Dad's worked as an engineer up in New Guinea and places like that. Up there I think we were fairly, maybe it was a bit of a privileged sort of little lifestyle, but when we came down to Australia he was out of work, and so we've certainly had our hard times. So I empathise with those people. A friend of mine has recently described me, not unkindly, as a unique entity, and my experiences have also included work in university administration, hospitality, all those other things. Been an Anglican church warden, helped set up a men's shed, been involved in local tourism, on the board of something there. So a lot of things. I'm also a historian, and it's true my work has been published. My thesis was published. It was about Indonesian history. It was translated into Indonesian without anyone asking me. It's for sale over there, and what I was talking about 1965 events became a bit topical again when I think people dug up some mass graves, and the army, who were very much involved at the time, got a bit snotty about it and went around and raided bookshops and confiscated my work, amongst others. So I put that up on LinkedIn. I thought, you can't beat that. Who's done that? If you Google me, as my kids at school have found, they just Google my surname, my name. Said you, but you're up first. Yeah. That's because I'm a bit active out there. So it's also an unusual name. So my part of the story is that CCA realised that they needed a more proactive focus on proteges. I was already a good friend of Ewan's, and Ewan was talking to me about it one night, and I raised the possibility, and I thought that would be a good thing, something I'm interested in. And I guess I'm in some ways a natural advocate. I have a daughter with autism. I have stepsons with ADHD, dyslexia, mild intellectual impairment. One has been to jail. That was after Mitchell had come out. So I've got a lot of understanding of that, and I've always been drawn to those sorts of people, and they've been drawn to me somehow. So I was quite willing to get in there. As my dad said later on when I was talking to him about it, I said, he said, just the right thing to do. So we soon established we had a lot in common and developed a friendship. Mitchell likes to tell people that I've been to jail more times than him. I said, yes, mate, but I didn't stay as long. So we've got different backgrounds with this shared interests. Maybe the backgrounds aren't so different after all. My dad's always been involved in engineering, mechanical sort of background. So is Mitchell. We both like working on cars. Mitchell loves his XR6s. I like European cars. Working my way through them now. I've had an Alfa, a Saab, a Beamer, got a Volvo now, hanging out for a Porsche. So there was plenty of times I'd say, well, I'm working on the Beamer and I've got to do this. He said, well, yeah, Pete, when are you going to do this? And so the prison visits would become, mechanical advice sessions, which was pretty cool. Dogs, we both had dogs. Mitchell, I had a dog, he's passed away now. It was a Rottweiler cross, gentle soul, but very traumatised as a pup. Really suspicious man. He went straight up to Mitchell for a pat. Didn't bat an eyelid. I thought, there you go. We both like finding treasure at tip shops and keeping old things going. And we also like fishing, but we haven't had too many opportunities. So I try to call Mitchell each week. He's doing okay at the moment. He'd been and got some more things. His neighbour was getting rid of some stuff he didn't want. So he scored it, and he's now going to clean it all up, and he puts it back up on Marketplace and sells it, makes a decent money. I drop in to see him when I'm up to heading north, because I still have a house in Mount Morgan. Can't afford a house in Brisbane, so I'll keep that one going. One occasion I turned up just in time to enter with my son and said, saw the police car and an ambulance out the front, and I thought, oh my God, what's happened? Turns out that his neighbour had taken offence or was upset with him and called him a piece of shit. And he said, oh, that's the nicest thing anyone said to me. So he said, go on and give Mitchell a good swipe. And he went down, and so the police were talking to the neighbour. I went over and saw Mitchell, and he was talking. And when he's stressed, things are going wrong, his speech sounded very much like he'd had a stroke or something. So I was able to introduce myself, say who I was, go and get his medication and explain all that. Then explain to the police what the role was, and I said, look, he's got no intention of doing the wrong thing, I can tell you now. So the other fellow got in trouble. Mitchell didn't. He was concerned about it though. He stayed with me in Rockhampton and Brisbane. Recently rang me up at 1:30 in the morning and said, we're coming down to pick up this thing, and we've had a bit of car problems. I was trying to think, who could I call? We could drop around and maybe camp the night and have a coffee. He said, hello, Pete. Yeah, righto. So he came down, and his neighbour came with him. He's got a licence, but it's still only a learner's. He's got to have a long-term learner's. So she comes down. She's glad to get away from the kids and the grandkids. So I stayed with Mitchell a couple of times. I caught up with him in Brisbane. He rang me and said, what are you doing? I said, oh, not much. He said, oh, I'm in hospital. Like, where? And he'd had another growth on his neck, gone to see the GP. GP said, well, keep an eye on it. A few weeks later, it was growing. And he went back and he said, can we do something about it? He said, no, we can't. I said, that's too much for me. I need to refer you to the hospital. He said, I'm not waiting. So he went home, sat in the shower, and took out a piece about as big as the top part of my thumb. Went into the hospital with that and said, can you make sure I got it all? They brought him down to Brisbane, thought they were going to do plastic surgery, but they stitched him up, sent him back, and now he's had something else, and it's pretty much a, yes, we'll look after you right now. But that's a fair bit of stoicism, I think. So I keep in contact with Mitchell's support worker and parole. If I'm concerned or I haven't heard from him, I'll ring his support worker. I get along really well with her, and we talk about things, and he's actually introduced her to the tip shop. So she's got a pink minibus, so they go off there and load it up, and they become partners in crime as well. So he's reconnected with his family in Gladstone, has their support. However, they've moved to Townsville now because their mum, his stepdaughter's got a better job. He's complying with his release conditions. He's not breached parole or re-offended. He can't drink, he can't drugs or anything like that. And if he does any of that, he'll return to prison. He's busy, keeping busy with projects. He's resourceful, he's resilient. He has good NDI supports. So his challenges, continues to live independently, hopes to move to Townsville. He's still vulnerable. His current accommodation is not ideal. Just make the best of it though. As he gets older, he's a need for ongoing, strong and positive connections. His memory, short-term memory in particular, is slipping. So he has a big whiteboards in his room. He writes things down, and we work with that. He must do what he can to maintain his physical and mental health, but working in Karmas does a lot for you. He needs to maintain routines. He's not always good at keeping his ABI, but they're fairly universal needs. So SRB, key part of this, he feels part of society. He helps other people out. It's certainly been good for me. Feels like my place in the world has a little bit more added meaning. I've always struggled with my own self-confidence and self-belief, but teaching kills a lot of that for you. I'd like to use, personally, my future to maybe do more advocacy with kids with autism, maybe as they come in contact with the justice system. So we're on YouTube. There's a gallery. That's when he first came out. He'd had throat cancer, so he'd had a lot of treatment, and he'd lost quite a few kilos. CCA Christmas do, and he made his own Santa Claus outfit. He learned a lot of skills in prison. That's one of his cars. He's bought a hoist, loaded it up, and that's his current companion. This is Ruby. Ruby is his best mate, and that's the camp bed I was sleeping on. I got off it, Ruby said, "I'm here." So we're good mates, more than anything. And I just want to thank everyone for the support. It's been brilliant. And my life is better for knowing Mitchell.